The 10th of July of 1941, the German 41st Motorized Corps advanced along the main road to Luga and Leningrad, but it was stopped by strong opposition by the Soviet Luga Operational Group. The road was narrow and the terrain was very dense forest, so the Germans could not flank the Soviets or even bring their superior firepower to the front. Oberst Walter Charles de Beaulieu, Chief of Staff of the 4th Panzergruppe, proposed a change of direction to the northwest towards Kingisepp in order to bypass these Soviet defenses. His boss, General Oberst Erich Höppner, agreed and got permission to change direction, so Reinhardt, the commander of the 41st Motorized Corps, advanced covertly through secondary and forest roads to the northwest. The Soviets had only token defenses in that area, south of Kingisepp and the river Luga, but the crossing of the river Luga was indeed guarded. Kampfgruppe Raus, the forward element of the 6th Panzer Division, arrived at the crossings of the river Luga. It included a reconnaissance unit with Brandenburg commandos, a force specialized in covert and sabotage actions, the very first unit of commandos in modern military history. The 8th Company of the Lehr or Training Regiment, Brandenburg, was commanded by Oberleutnant der Reserve Siegfried Gravert, who had already shown his value in previous operations. For example, he seized the waterlocks of Newport in Belgium in May of 1940 and the Vardar Bridge near Axiopoli in northern Greece in April of 1941. Oberleutnant Gravert and his assistant, Lieutenant Renner, gathered the 50 commandos composed of 5 non-commissioned officers and 45 soldiers and set on the mission. They had to capture the bridge over the river Luga and a river dam in Ivanovskoye, a few kilometers north from the bridge. The Soviets could destroy that bridge, delaying or blocking the German advance. Also, the waterlocks in the Ivanovskoye dam could be opened, flooding the fields and blocking the advance to Leningrad. The next day, Lieutenant Renner and 2 other Russian-speaking Brandenburg commandos in Soviet uniforms drove to the bridge in a captured BA-10 Soviet armored car. A captured Soviet ZIS truck full of Brandenburg commandos in Soviet uniforms followed them. Just before 1100 hours, they arrived at the Paritsie bridge on the river Luga. There were Soviet sentries and defensive bunkers manned by the 51st Regiment of the 2nd Division of the NKVD. Lieutenant Renner approached the bridge and killed the sentries, while the commandos filled the area with smoke so the defensive bunkers could not see what they were shooting at. The Germans eliminated the bunkers, throwing hand grenades to the gun embrasures at very close range. The commandos cut the wires connected to the explosives under the bridge, and then Oberleutnant Gravert arrived with the rest of the company mounted on Panzer 35T tanks to secure the bridge from any Soviet counterattacks. Losing no time, they rushed north and captured the Ivanovskoye Dam before the Soviets could open the waterlocks. As an unexpected bonus to this operation, a Soviet prisoner revealed the location of an aerodrome less than 20 kilometers to the north. Oberleutnant Gravert and a platoon of 5 Panzer 35T tanks rushed north and easily captured it by 1600 hours. The whole operation lasted only 5 hours, and only 1 commando was injured. Oberleutnant Siegfried Gravert, Lieutenant Renner, and 50 Brandenburg commandos captured a vital bridge, a river dam, and an aerodrome. The river Luga had been crossed. The German forces in the Paritsie bridgehead on the Luga River were only a fraction of the whole 6th Panzer Division, of course. The rest of the division was sprawled throughout the forest trails all the way to Liadi and the river Plusa, making their way to the newly conquered beachhead and establishing supply routes through the swampy forest and appalling roads. Therefore, Kampfgruppe Raus was entirely on its own for a few days, with the task of defending the bridgehead. The German force consisted of 2 infantry battalions, 1 panzer battalion, 2 artillery battalions, 1 flak battalion, and a company of engineers. The 14th of July, the same day, Field Marshal Voroshilov and General Lieutenant Popov arrived at the Kingisepp area. The 2nd Proletarian Militia Division, a tank regiment, and a separate KV tank battalion from the Leningrad Officer Armor School joined them in an effort to dislodge the Germans from the Paritsi bridgehead on the Luga. The 2nd Proletarian Militia Division was formed from volunteers from Moscow only 10 days before it was deployed against Kampfgruppe Raus. Even a detachment of cadets from the Leningrad Red Banner Infantry School was sent. They were supported by artillery, naval guns from the Baltic Fleet, and air support. For the next few days, the Soviets actually had air superiority. The bridgehead was almost 4 kilometers deep, but only 400 meters wide, and it was completely surrounded by swampy forests which could be traversed in summer by infantry. The Soviets had no visibility at all because the edge of the woods was in German hands. Tank and vehicle movement was strictly limited to the road. The 14th of July, the 2nd Proletarian Militia Division attacked the German bridgehead in Ivanovskoye without preparation right after it unloaded from the train. The Soviets did not know that the Germans were not prepared to advance actually, since only Kampfgruppe Raus held the beachhead while the rest of the panzer divisions were still catching up. But the sense of urgency was high on the Soviet side, since the 2nd Proletarian Militia Division was the only sizable force in front of the Germans. A tank regiment and a separate KV tank battalion from the Leningrad Officer Armored School joined them. Their initial attack was observed by Popov and Voroshilov, and according to Soviet sources, General Polkovnik Markin Popov went personally in a T-34 to reconnoiter the field. His tank was actually hit 3 times, but the T-34 was not penetrated. This first frontal assault was defeated with heavy casualties. The next days, the Soviets continued their assault in order to eliminate the German bridgeheads. The Proletarian Militia Division and the Soviet tanks were assisted by Soviet bombers and Soviet coastal batteries that targeted and destroyed concentrations of German infantry, road crossings, tanks, artillery, and vehicles. I quote Oberst Eckhard Raus, who commanded the German troops in this battle. Enemy artillery fired 20 times as many rounds per day as our own batteries. It pounded the bridges and the edge of the woods. In unobserved fire, the enemy spent more than 2,000 medium shells a day targeting the bridges without ever hitting them. Enemy aircraft roared all day above the narrow corridor of the bridgehead and inflicted serious losses on our troops. Soon the road was lined with a long row of German soldiers' graves, marked with birchwood crosses. As often as 10 times a day, the enemy attacked the road fork which was enclosed by the projecting arc of the bridgehead. Each attack was headed by as many tanks, echeloned in depth as the narrow road would accommodate. Time and again, the enemy attacks were repulsed, and time and again they were renewed. Wave after wave of Russian forces assembled, concealed by many wrecked tanks and heaps of corpses, and stormed recklessly into the murderous defensive fire. The attacks did not subside until the enemy no longer had the necessary men and ammunition at his disposal. Soon, however, replacements of proletarians and new ammunition supplies arrived from Leningrad. The assaults on the road fork were stubbornly and incessantly resumed until passage through the narrow attack corridors was no longer possible because they were completely clogged by disabled enemy tanks and decaying heaps of corpses. Later, we counted more than 2,000 dead Russians and 78 knocked out enemy tanks and vehicles in this narrow combat zone alone. End of quote. As Eckhard Raus wrote after the war, these frontal and more importantly, uncoordinated attacks failed time and time again. The only variation was changing the frontal attack with attacks along both sides of the road. So the Soviets changed tactics and now sent infantry through the dense forest. But the Germans expected these attacks on the flanks. Oberst Eckhard Raus arranged 2 tank units, one at the road fork and the other at the bridge, ready to intervene when the Soviet infantry appeared on the road. And every time the proletarian militiamen appeared, They were attacked by panzers from both sides of the road. Every time it was a small massacre. Only a few Red Army soldiers escaped through the woods. Only once a Soviet company of 150 soldiers succeeded in crossing the Paretsy Bridge over to the southern side of the river Luga, but it was surprised and destroyed on the spot by a German Sonderkraftfahrzeug, which is a special-purpose vehicle personnel armor carrier. The last Soviet change in tactic was to send a reinforced infantry regiment from Kingisepp and 2 battalions from the 3rd Proletarian Militia Division to attack the bridgehead from behind. But both attacks were caught in a pincer move from the south and the bridgehead and destroyed. The fight raged until the 23rd of July, but by then the full force of the panzer divisions as well as supplies had reached the German bridgehead, and the initiative would once again go to the Germans in the following days. According to Oberst Eckhard Haus, this example demonstrates the complete failure of the intermediate and lower Russian command echelons, who did not understand how to coordinate the different units and weapons into a common and simultaneous attack from all sides. The weak German units, which were fighting a losing battle, would not have been able to withstand such an attack. And so ends this episode. I hope you liked it. If you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you didn't, well, thank you so much for watching this far.